Good afternoon, and welcome to the last Jewish Policy Center webinar of August. I am Shoshana Bryan, Senior Director of the JPC and your host. So I raised the point that we're at the end of August, not only because it's Labor Day and the kids are back in school, but because we have some important anniversaries coming up, none of them good. In April, we missed this one, was the 40th anniversary of the U.S. Embassy bombing in Beirut, killing 63 people. We are on the verge of the 22nd anniversary of 9/11, which took the lives of 2,753 innocent people in New York, 156 people at the Pentagon, and 256 people on the 4 planes. And in October, we're going to have the 40th anniversary of the Marine barracks bombing in Beirut that killed 241 American military personnel, 58 French military personnel, and 6 civilians. That's a lot of memorializing that we have to do. Most of you received the Insight article last week by Rabbi Arnold Resnikoff, a good friend of the JPC, who was the Jewish chaplain on the ground at the Marine barracks bombing. His piece, The Camouflage Kippah, is an extraordinary reflection on the time and place, and we received amazing feedback from our members. If you haven't read it, please go to our website and read it, jewishpolicycenter.org. But that brings us to today, because all those numbers I gave you were for victims, not perpetrators. Jewish tradition says that when an evil person dies, like a terrorist, we say, may his name be erased. In this context, that could be a problem. We're reminded by today's speaker, Clare Lopez, that part of Rabbi Resnikoff's story is not exactly about us, but about the planners, executioners, and organizers of that bombing and others. Focusing on the event without proper attention to the evildoers, to borrow a phrase, is not helpful to strategic thinking. Clare is here to remind us who they are, what they did, and what they're still doing. So I'm going to give you the short version of the JPC commercial, and then we're going to get to our speaker. The Jewish Policy Center was established in 1985 as a 501c3 organization, providing analysis of both foreign and domestic policies. You can find us on our website, jewishpolicycenter.org. There you can read our Insight articles, including Rabbi Resnikoff, but all the others as well, and see our magazine In Focus. You can catch up on the webinars that you might have missed. All of it is at jewishpolicycenter.org. The JPC supports a strong American defense capability, U.S.-Israel security cooperation, and missile defense. We support the legitimacy and security of Israel against anyone who would deny them. As an organization that sits slightly to the right of center, the JPC advocates for small government, low taxes, free trade, fiscal responsibility, energy security, free speech, and intellectual diversity. I know, it's a big plate. Today, however, we are focused on the bad guys and U.S. security. Clare Lopez is our speaker, a former career operations officer with the CIA. Clare is founder and president of Lopez Liberty, with a mission to alert Americans to security threats, both national and international, from the Islamic movement, the Muslim Brotherhood, and their collaborators in this country. She's also senior advisory board member and director of U.S. geostrategic security issues for the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement. She has served as an advisor and mentor to U.S. Special Forces students. She has been a professor at the Center for Counterintelligence and Security Studies, as well as a visiting researcher and guest lecturer on counterterrorism, national defense, and international relations at Georgetown University. She has been a consultant, instructor, intelligence analyst, and researcher for American defense firms. A regular contributor to a range of media on China, Russia, Iran, and the Middle East, Clare is co-author of 2 published books on Iran and author of multiple books and multiple chapters and articles on China and its civilian military fusion of biological weapons program. We are going to have her back to talk about that last one. But for today, it's about terrorists. And Clare Lopez, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Shoshana, and thanks to all the team there at the Jewish Policy Center. It's an honor to be with you today. And thanks to all of our guests and listeners who are with us today as well. As Shoshana said, we're coming up on a number of very solemn memorial remembrances. September 11, of course, in just a couple of weeks. We remember two tragedies. Of course, the 9/11 tragedy, the attacks of September 11 in 2001, but then also, and for a specific reason, again, on the night of September 11, 2012, in Benghazi, in Libya, where 4 Americans were killed in the Al-Qaeda attacks on our special mission compound there. And then, as Shoshana said, coming up in October, we'll be remembering once again the tragedy of the 1983 attacks in Beirut that hit our embassy, our Marine Corps barracks, and also the French embassy and French forces there in Lebanon at that time too. Let me mention just a couple of other things from my background that have helped me to come to the understanding of some of the things we're going to talk about today. After 9/11, I was already in the private sector, as Shoshana said, working for a number of private companies, federal contractors, but I came to be associated with the Iran Policy Committee, and I was a founding member and active participant in that think tank, Washington, D.C., based for a couple of years. That is when I really began to dive into my study of Iran, Hezbollah, and the Farsi language, which I continue to study as a very slow learner. And then also, I was an expert witness in a legal case, and that's what we're going to get to today here. I was an expert witness in a legal case. We just call it the Havlish case, but its name actually, Fiona Havlish plaintiffs versus Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, Islamic Republic of Iran, Islamic Ministry of Information and Security, that's their intelligence service, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, Hezbollah, Iranian Ministry of Petroleum, and a couple of others, very long list in this legal case. And the legal case is where I want to take us today. So after 9/11, a number of widows, some widows of pilots on that awful day, but others too, joined together. We eventually came to call them the 7 widows. And they did not trust the United States government to get to the bottom of what had happened on 9/11. And so they came to a law firm in Pennsylvania, which eventually grew to a consortium of about 8 or 9 law firms. This began in 2002 or so. I did not join the effort until 2009. And the legal case went to court. Judge George Daniels, Southern District of New York in Manhattan, was the presiding judge, went to him and his court in May of 2011. And just before Christmas that year, end of December 2011, Judge George Daniels ruled from the bench that indeed Iran and Hezbollah were co-responsible with Al-Qaeda for the attacks of 9/11. Now, yes, Saudi Arabia absolutely up to its eyeballs as well, but not as deeply involved or closely involved as were Iran and Hezbollah. And that's what I really wanted to talk about today, because the reverberations from those attacks and the others we've just talked about continue to this day, and I sincerely think that we're not finished with that yet. So the legal case really began before I joined it with a look at Iraq and with Saddam Hussein as possibly involved in the attacks of 9/11. But the team working on that included, for example, Ken Timmerman, well-known author and writer, quickly determined that Iraq and Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11. And at that point, the focus switched to looking at Iran and Hezbollah. As I said, I did not become involved until about 2009, through the end till 2011, when the judgment was rendered. But I wasn't an expert witness in the case, and together with colleague and friend Dr. Bruce Teft, wrote an affidavit for the case, which traced the history of the Iran, Hezbollah, Al Qaeda, jihad relationship. So that's the background that I bring to this, and why I responded with a note to Shoshana after last week's presentation, and mindful of these solemn remembrances dates coming up in September and October. So to just lay the groundwork for where this comes from, and why we focused on Iran and Hezbollah. You probably have heard the saying, I guess, I against my brother and I against our cousin, and so forth. This is called the balanced opposition, concept of balanced opposition that's prevalent in Arab and desert societies of the Middle East. And at the top, the macro level of that balanced opposition, you have Dar al-Islam versus Dar al-Harb. So Dar al-Islam means house of Islam, and it means all those places already under Islamic law, Sharia. Dar al-Harb means house of war, that is, all those other places that are not under Islamic law or rule of Sharia. And so when we understand that concept, we can understand how Shiite Iran and Hezbollah could possibly have come together or joined with this very Sunni Al Qaeda. But they did, and remain so to this day. A very difficult concept to get through to some of our national security leadership, which to this very day pushes back on this concept. Oh, they could never, ever come together. But even as they happily tear each other to shreds on local battlefields on the ground, remember, at the balanced opposition out to the macro level, at that macro level, they very much do come together, because it's Dar al-Islam versus Dar al-Harb. We of the West, what's left of it, we still are part of Dar al-Harb, the house of war, the place to be attacked, the place to be conquered and subjugated to Islamic law. That is what that concept means. So let's go back a little bit of history, and this is what I trace in this affidavit that I've mentioned to you. Maybe right now I'll mention to you the website. Our legal case, the Havlish case, and the documents associated with it are to be found at the website Iran911case.com. However, at the moment, the website is having difficulties, and it is being refurbished. So hang on to that website, Iran911case.com. It will be back up again online with all the documents associated with it. If you go to the tabs at the top, there's one called Exhibits, and our affidavit, the one that I co-authored with Dr. Bruce Teft, is exhibit number 6. So eventually, when that website gets back up again, you might have a look there. So the way we traced this out was going back to the 1980s, the war in Afghanistan, the invasion of the Soviet Union, the decade-long war there, during which the United States, seeking to oppose and help to debilitate and bring down the Soviet Union, joined up with and supported the so-called Mujahideen. The Mujahideen were the fighters of Afghanistan that fought against the Red Army and eventually prevailed with our and a lot of other help from the outside. Well, at that time, there was no Al Qaeda and there was no Taliban, not yet. Later on in the 1990s, these would coalesce. Fast forward to about 1990, and the war is over in Afghanistan, and fighters are returning back to wherever they came from, because they came from all over the Islamic world. And you might recall that Osama bin Laden, who, by the way, was never a fighter, he was a financier. He financed things like Toyota pickup trucks and housing for jihadis en route to and from the battlefields. but he wanted to go back home to Saudi Arabia. And he said, well, you know, I've got fighters, Saudi fighters and others that fought in Afghanistan. And Saddam Hussein is now threatening Saudi Arabia and other neighbors of Iraq's in the Gulf. We can come and support Saudi Arabia against Saddam Hussein. And the Saudi royal family said, not so much. No, we don't want you to come back here at all. We'll manage. And so what those fighters did, Osama bin Laden and they, were invited by then ruler of Sudan, Muslim Brotherhood ruler Umar al-Bashir, Umar al-Bashir, and his close Muslim Brotherhood ally Hassan al-Turabi at that time. And so they, the fighters, went there to Khartoum, and the rulers of Sudan then decided to hold what I've come to call a jihad jamboree. And they invited all the jihadis of the world, literally. PFLP was there, the PLO was there. Yes, the leadership of Hezbollah was there, and also the entire top leadership of the Iranian regime at the time. President at that time, Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, the head of Iranian intelligence, Ali Falahian, was there. The head of the IRGC at the time, Mohsen Rezai, was there. He's still around, by the way, with the current regime in Iran, still to this day, and others. And again, Shiite and Sunni coming together. Why? To formulate a plan to join an alliance post-Afghanistan to take the fight, to take the war, Dar al-Harb, to the West, to the enemies of Islam as they saw us, the Americans and those allied with us. And so what happened there is that Osama bin Laden turns to Rafsanjani and he says, hey, can your boys, Hezbollah boys, show my guys how to do big truck vehicle bombings that bring down buildings, referring back to the attacks in 1983 on our Marine Corps barracks and also our embassy. Also, as I said, the French got hit too. Why were we even there in 1983? We were there to help protect Yasser Arafat and his PLO, which were then at that time destabilizing Lebanon, having been kicked out of Jordan about a decade or more before that. That is the beginning of the era of Hezbollah, which was formed in the 1980s in Lebanon among Shiites of, in particular, southern Lebanon. And the director or the mastermind of those attacks in 1983, commemoration again, October, in another couple of months, the mastermind of those attacks was Imad Mughniya. Remember that name because we're going to talk about him. Imad Mughniya. And he's the one that I guess you might say pioneered the use of vehicles like big trucks, later on also boats and eventually planes, to take down buildings. Now, quick story here. After the attacks against our forces, the French forces, our embassies, and so forth, Ronald Reagan, of course, is president in the United States, and he convenes his top national security advisors, and says, "Can we find out who did this, and can we go after them?" And at the time, dearly departed and so much missed, friend and mentor Ace Lyons, 4-star retired admiral, retired as the commander of SINCPAC Pacific Fleet. He was called in. I think he was the commander of the Mediterranean Fleet at that time, called in with the others. Can we find out who did this and how to go after them? And Ace Lyons says, yeah, and they're working with the French. They find out quite quickly that this is nascent, just being developed, Hezbollah, under the leadership, the attacks were under the leadership anyway, of Imad Mughniya. There was a headquarters for Hezbollah, still is really to this day, in the Bekaa Valley, King Abdullah Barracks of Bekaa Valley. And Ace Lyons and the French come up with certain evidence that they were responsible, plan to go after them, hit them in the Bekaa Valley. And unfortunately, that plan was nixed. It was never carried out. There was no retaliation by us, the French, or anybody else, even though we know perfectly well that it was Hezbollah and Imad Mughniya that led those attacks. The reason, apparently, best I can tell, is somehow national security leadership, in particular Cap Weinberger, around President Reagan at the time, were afraid somehow we're going to upset our Arab, not partners, but the Arab world. And they didn't want to upset the Arab world. So no retaliation ever took place. Instead, what did we do, and the French too? Withdrew our forces. We took our forces out of southern Lebanon, removed them, fled. That gave the absolute worst signal possible to Hezbollah and the other jihadis, which were then seizing control of Lebanon and have succeeded today in taking control of Lebanon, which is not an independent country. It is a satrap of Iran under the rule, under the domination of Hezbollah. So that set the stage. And now go back again where we were to Khartoum after the Afghan war. We're in Khartoum in 1990, and that's why Osama bin Laden asked Rafsanjani, can your boys teach my boys how to do that? And of course, Rafsanjani says, yeah, sure. Says, Imad, come on over here. And he orders Imad Mughniya to set up training camps for Al-Qaeda to teach them how to do suicide bombings against big buildings. Those camps were set up in Sudan, in Lebanon, in Iran, maybe other places too. And that is how Al-Qaeda began to master this, I guess, technique of bringing down big buildings. What happened after that? You had 1996 Khobar Towers in Tehran, Saudi Arabia, US Air Force, brought down by an Al-Qaeda suicide bomber in a truck, but by whom trained? By Hezbollah. Go to 1998, the East Africa Embassy bombings in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Again, big truck suicide bombings against those embassy buildings. Again, Al-Qaeda responsible. Who trained them? Who taught them? Imad Mughniya and Hezbollah. Fast forward to October of 2000 and the attack in the harbor in Yemen against the USS Cole. And again, not a truck this time, but a boat carrying the explosive, same idea. They managed to save the vessel, but I think it was 17 of our naval personnel were killed. And that's 2000. All right, now we're up on the eve, really, of the 9/11 attacks. What happened there? Again, I'm going back to our affidavit. This is all coming from the affidavit in the Havlish case that I wrote together with Bruce Teft. So in late 2000 and into early 2001, and we also have this not just from the affidavit, but other places I got it, including the 9/11 Commission report. We have the information that it was Imad Mughniya himself who went to Saudi Arabia on multiple occasions and recruited the Saudi muscle hijackers, 15 out of the 19, from villages up and down the western coast of Saudi Arabia along the Red Sea. In the 9/11 Commission report, I'm looking at pages 240 to 241. Mughniya's name is not mentioned, but what it does say is names Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda members received advice and training from Hezbollah. And it does say that a senior operative of Hezbollah visited Saudi Arabia to coordinate activities there. Isn't that a nice way of putting it? Imad Mughniya went to Saudi Arabia to recruit the hijackers. They could have just said that, but they said to coordinate activities there. He was recruiting the hijackers. And so we know from at least that source and others that it was Imad Mughniya who actually did that recruiting. We're seeing, again, the alliance among Sunni and Shiite in the lead up to 9/11. A lot of this information, I'll have to say, was squashed. I mean, completely squashed by the George W. Bush administration, obviously the Obama administration that followed that. I think that the Trump administration probably never even heard about any of this. They were never briefed, is my that's my judgment. And of course, the current administration probably doesn't know this information either. Squashed when it came out. The media played along as well and would not let any of this information reach mainstream media. Now, we also have confirmation, again, from the 9/11 Commission report, not just that, Imad Mughniya was recruiting the hijackers, but from KSM, the 9/11 Commission report cites Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, currently at Gitmo. They're trying to work out a plea deal for him so he doesn't have to face the death penalty. I mean, that's really nice on the eve of 9/11. But from him and other sources, KSM, it also has been confirmed that the hijackers transited Iran on their way to and from Afghanistan in the lead up to 9/11, also transited Iran and Lebanon. We had a very excellent affidavit in the case submitted by Janice Kephart, an expert on international travel, passports, and the like. And she told us, and she wrote in her affidavit, that the agreement reached between Iran and Saudi Arabia pre 9/11 is that a mark, and to this day we don't know what the mark was because it's classified to this day, but something was placed in the passports of these Saudi hijackers so that they could transit back and forth across the borders, and the border guards had been briefed and trained to look for the mark, and when they saw it, they would not stamp those passports. That is how those Saudi hijackers eventually got visas. I mean, they took those clean passports eventually to some consulate, I suppose, in Saudi Arabia, I don't know which one, and applied for visas and got them. That's how they got to the United States, on visas. But the passports were clean because the Saudis and the Iranians worked out a way for the border guards not to stamp those passports, as Imad Mughniya was actually accompanying these hijackers on their travels back and forth across the region for operational planning, training, and oh yes, by the way, the IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, had bought plane simulators, training simulators in East Asia someplace, maybe it was Malaysia. And they brought those simulators back to Iran, and that's where the hijackers first trained on big jet simulators before they came to the United States and then went to flight schools here. That is in our affidavit as well. So I'm looking at my clock here. I'm watching the time. So that is 9/11, and the story behind it that I think a lot of people really don't know, because our national security leadership and the media colluded to squash this story. And the judge's ruling, Judge George Daniels' ruling in December of 2011, when it came out. And so many other details can be found in our affidavit and at that website, once it's back up again, about the deep, close involvement of the Iranian regime and Hezbollah and its top leadership, in particular Imad Mughniya, in the attacks, not just of the Marine Corps barracks bombing of 1983, our embassy there, but also all the way to 9/11. Now, Imad Mughniya, as you perhaps know, went off to meet his virgins, if there are any, in February of 2008 as he exited a meeting or a tryst with his mistress, or not quite sure what, in Damascus, Syria, and went out to his car, where the headrest in the car, in the driver's seat, had been a bomb had been planted inside of it, and according to reporting, his head landed on the lawn some meters away. It was great. So he's gone as of 2008, but this was his legacy. This was his background, and his involvement in these tragic, remembrances that we're going to once again commemorate in the next month or two. Very quickly, just to wrap this up, after 9/11, we do know now from multiple sources and actually confirmed by senior administration officials like then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld and others, that bolt holes, if you will, escape routes, had already been planned for Al-Qaeda and their fighters and some families too. After 9/11, they knew perfectly well the United States would come after them in Afghanistan. They knew that. And the bolt holes had been planned long time before. They went in three main different directions. One, to the mountains between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Another group, I think mostly under the leadership of Ayman al-Zawahiri at that time. Number two, to Osama bin Laden, later the leader of Al-Qaeda itself, went to cities in Pakistan like Quetta. And the third, and perhaps the largest group, went across to Iran. And that had been prepared long time since, for example, by a former Mujahideen leader named Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. Also, Ayman al-Zawahiri apparently had helped to work out that arrangement. And so Osama bin Laden, family and fighters escaped to Iran, and they were in Iran under safe haven, protected by the IRGC from late 2001 all the way to about mid 2010. And at that point, that is when they decamped and went over to Abbottabad in Pakistan, where our guys found them about a year later in May of 2011. Some of the Al-Qaeda fighters remained, and to this day remain, inside of Iran, in particular for a very long time. Military commander Saif al-Adil, I think he may have gone back to Afghanistan now, but for many years, he headed up the Al-Qaeda contingent militarily inside of Iran, again, under protection of the Iranian regime, the IRGC, MOIS, Quds Force, and operated out of there. The attacks on the Madrid train, the train system, transit bombing, that was coordinated out of Iran by Al-Qaeda. There was a plot to take down a railway called the Via Railway that runs between New York and Toronto, Canada. And during that trip, the passenger train, this is the passenger train, passes over the gorge over Niagara Falls. Well, some years ago, you might remember this, there was a plot by Al-Qaeda operating out of Iran to bomb that train as it passed over the Niagara Falls River Gorge. Well, happily for everybody involved, that plot was discovered ahead of time. But these are examples of how Al-Qaeda remained operating out of Iran even after 9/11. Did our senior officials and national security people know about this? Absolutely, they knew. But for whatever reason, they wouldn't talk about it. They wouldn't do anything about it. And to this day, it's been lip sealed. Maybe I should stop there. I am looking at the clock and know that there are a lot of questions you might all have. and definitely, I promised Shoshana I would leave, some time for those. So let's go to the questions, huh?
Thank you, Claire. It's a march down memory lane that I think we don't want to take, but we have to take. And I appreciate all the stuff that brings us up to a current question. And the current question is a statement first. We American citizens do not seem to be aware of or concerned about attacks similar to those either of the barracks bombing or 9/11 in our daily lives. Now, the question part is that because we're not in Afghanistan or Iraq? We're mostly gone from Lebanon, and we haven't had any major terrorist attacks in the United States. Are we not paying attention to stuff that's out there, number one? And should we?
Yes to all those questions. Absolutely, Shoshana. So, yes, I would say that the military aspect of our global war on terror, as it used to be called, was quite effective in suppressing violent terrorism by jihadi enemies in the post 9/11 period. And happily, there have been no more major, let's say 9/11 scale jihadi attacks inside the United States since then. There have been others, obviously. But here's my concern, and you mentioned we're not paying attention, and perhaps because of the success of that military offensive against the jihadis, we're not thinking about that so much anymore, but we should. One of the reasons is the Department of Defense airlift out of Kabul airport in August of 2021, 2 years ago, of tens of thousands of completely unvetted, unchecked Afghans. And as I mentioned to Shoshana earlier, our Al-Qaeda, Taliban enemies would have had to have been brain dead not to seed those flights with their own jihadi operatives. They were brought to the United States and resettled all over the United States. We have no idea who they are or what they're up to. But in addition to that, we've now got, I think, gathering inside of Afghanistan many of the same players as pre 9/11. Certainly the Taliban and Al-Qaeda are still there and still aligned and working together. By the way, Hezbollah has been training the Taliban since pre 9/11. Maybe folks don't know that either. They're still training the Taliban.
So the other thing,
the addition in Afghanistan, I was going to say, is the Islamic State. Islamic State in Khorasan, they call it, in the south, sort of southeastern part of Afghanistan. They've got a foothold. So the same and more jihadis are gathering right now, gathering strength. And with the addition of $85 billion worth of left behind equipment and weaponry that we left to them, and Bagram Air Force Base, they're gathering once more. And then we have no idea how many who are coming across our southern border. That's the other part of this. Wide open southern border. Estimates by CBP, Customs and Border Protection, maybe, we don't even know how many, millions, 5 million more have come in the last 2 years, 2.5 years, plus gotaways. Those are the ones they kind of know about, plus gotaways, as they call them. They saw them on a camera or know they got through but couldn't catch them. Another million or more. We don't even know. Why wouldn't they be using the open southern border to come into the United States? I mean, of course. Never mind China's jungle tigers besides.
So that was the other half of my question, that we had talked about the southern border. Thank you for hitting that. Slide over. The questions are all over the place. So slide over for a minute to Africa. And we're seeing enormous upheaval in Africa.
Yes.
A lot of people being killed, a lot of wreckage in Africa, which I think contributes to the military juntas that have taken over because they want to fight those people. What's the connection between ISIS in Africa, which is doing so much damage, the guys in Afghanistan, the guys in Iran, the guys in Hezbollah, all together?
Well, the first thing to note is that jihad aimed at Africa began in the 7th century. As the forces of the Islamic armies burst out of the Arabian Peninsula, they went in all directions, including west. And it took many centuries of progression across North Africa, and then a kind of a left-hand turn, if you will, down the west coast of Africa. And what we're seeing today is the advance of those forces, which now include Islamic State, yes, also Al-Qaeda, in West Africa. That's how far they've gotten now in the 14 or something centuries. In particular, we can look at Nigeria. It's got 36 states, the top 18 of them, northern, already under Islamic law, under Sharia. Abuja, the capital, sits in the middle of the country, and then 18 states to the south, which are in conflict. But that's not the only place. We can name Mali. We can name Cote d'Ivoire. We can name Cameroon. We can name 2 coups d'etats in the last, what is it, month or a little more than a month? One in Niger, one in Nigeria. Very destabilized area. And yes, not just the forces of jihad, Islamic State and Al-Qaeda have a strong presence there trying to destabilize these countries, but also just to put the cherry on the ice cream, the Wagner forces of now dearly departed Yevgeny Prigozhin.
So there were people who said we should have left Africa to the Wagner forces and said, forget about it. But jump again. Now jump from Africa to South America. And we have a listener question. The attacks in Buenos Aires against the Jewish Community Center and the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, again, same perpetrators, same influences?
Yes, very good question. Thanks for bringing that up. In 1992, the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires was hit, and in 1994, the Jewish Cultural Center called AMIA was hit. Both of those by truck suicide bombings. Yes, both of them coordinated out of the Iranian embassy in Buenos Aires and drawing on Hezbollah forces, which were again under the leadership of Imad Mughniyeh. Those Hezbollah forces staging out of what's called the tri-border area of South America. That is the place where the borders of Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay all come together and meet. And it's kind of always been a lawless place. The security services of none of those 3 countries really police it properly. I mean, you've got car theft and all kinds of counterfeiting going on and drug trafficking and so forth. But that was the place where Hezbollah found an ideal foothold when it first came in the 80s, the early 1980s, to Latin America. And to this day have a presence there in the tri-border area, but from there expanded outwards, upward, northward throughout South America, to the point now where Hezbollah is very closely aligned with the regime of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela and other places, and then head further north. The Hezbollah operatives are all throughout Central America on up through Mexico and into the United States too. We could talk about that as well, but deeply involved with the Mexican cartels in narco trafficking and have been for a very long time. And that, of course, is aimed at customers, if you will, in the United States and all the way on up into Canada. So yes, a very big presence throughout the Western Hemisphere and a direct threat to the United States. We don't hear much about it now, but through public documents made public through different trials, when the FBI and DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, actually took this as a priority and went after these guys. But I'm afraid those days are in the rearview mirror at the moment.
Okay, so a listener, now back up, a listener writes in and asks, historically, Saudi Arabia has seen Iran as its greatest threat. Why would they have colluded on something like 9/11 to damage the United States, which is in fact the protector of Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, I get the question. I understand that gets back to the Sunni Shiite split of centuries old, right? And the reason goes back to balanced opposition. This concept at the local level, again, tear each other to shreds, and they've done this for 14 centuries. Shiites and Sunnis love to tear each other apart on the battlefield. This is just the way it is. From the Battle of Karbala in the year 680 all the way to the present time. However, at the macro level, what did we say? Dar al-Harb versus Dar al-Islam, or Dar al-Islam versus Dar al-Harb. And that is how they came together for those attacks of 9/11. And again, remember the Jihad Jamboree I talked about. And there wasn't just one of those. It went through the early 1990s, multiple, I guess, gatherings in Khartoum. Shiites and Sunnis working together, Muslim Brotherhood. Who paid for the Ayatollah Khomeini's final 18 months of exile in France, outside of Paris at Château-le-Neuf? Who paid for that? The Muslim Brotherhood paid for that. A guy named Yusuf Nada, who founded the Al-Taqwa Bank, exile in Switzerland, eventually raided and so forth. But he, Muslim Brotherhood, paid for Khomeini's stay in Château-le-Neuf. Also paid for the plane flight home when Khomeini finally returned to Iran, to Tehran, with his followers in 1979, in February of 1979. Who paid for it? The Muslim Brotherhood paid for that. Where did they first come together? Remember what I said? They came together in the Bekaa Valley under the training of the KGB. Yes, the KGB. Evgeny Primakov, originally Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Russia, then KGB director, Russia, directed all of that. We know this from the defector Jan Pacepa, senior Romanian intelligence officer defector. Shiite and Sunni were brought together in the Bekaa Valley all those years ago, the 70s, if not sooner.
Okay, ton of information, lots of questions. Clearly, we have missed the boat here. We failed to retaliate for the Marine barracks bombing. We're not watching our southern border. We're not watching any of our borders.
No.
What should policy look like? I'm not asking you what you think the president should do or shouldn't do in the political sense, but in the broadest sense, what should American security policy be looking like?
Well, were I the national security advisor, or a national security advisor, I would say the first thing to do would be to do a study, I guess, to understand who are the enemies of the United States, of the West more broadly, and how have they been for decades coming after us? And that would include things like the presence of Iran and Hezbollah in the Western Hemisphere. It would include the gathering forces of these enemies inside of Afghanistan. Once again, the same actors, again, as before 9/11, addition of Islamic State Khorasan. Obviously, I would move immediately to secure the southern border, the northern border too, by the way, but the southern border more urgently. And that would mean remain in Mexico policy comes back, finish the wall comes back, detain and deport comes back, e-verify enforced within the United States comes back, all these policies. But it would have to be a different makeup to our National Security Council, not the current one that is, groveling on hands and knees across broken glass to get the Iranians to agree to a renewal of the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear agreement from Obama years in 2015. No, understand that when Iran says Marg bar Amerika, that's Farsi, it means death to America, and they really do mean it. Understand how close they are to the deployment of a deliverable nuclear weapon. And it cannot be just up to Israel to save the Middle East, the world, the United States from that eventuality. We need to be behind Israel and supporting Israel as they understand step by step how close Iran is getting to that objective, that goal of deploying a deliverable nuclear weapon. There's so many different things, but these are the ones that come to mind.
So several people have concluded here correctly, I think, that Iran is perhaps the biggest part of the problem. And so there are several questions that come from that. The first is, can the problem of Iran be negotiated away, or can it only be eliminated by force? And second part is, with our withdrawal from Afghanistan, it appears that there is a second locus for this that may not be Iran. I don't want to say it's not Iran directed, it is Iran directed, but now you have two centers. You have a center in Iran, which is where the leadership is, the political guys are, and you may have to get rid of the mullahs.
Yeah.
And you have something in Afghanistan. Do those have to be dealt with separately?
Well, let's start with Iran itself and the threat that it poses. No, I do not think it can be dealt with by diplomacy. I mean, haven't our leaders, national security presidencies tried that for the last, where are we now, 8 years or so? Actually, more than that, because the context began well before the deal in 2015. No, that's not going to work. And the reason, we didn't even touch on this, but the reason is that the leadership in Iran, meaning the clerical hierarchy, which are Shiites, they're 12er Shiites, and the very much vetted senior leadership of the IRGC, the Quds Force, the Basij forces, they are true believers in the ideology of the 12th Imam, which we didn't even talk about, but very briefly, they think that the messianic figure of 12er, meaning the 12th Imam, Shiite Islam, the Mahdi, they identify him as the Mahdi, is going to come back at the end of time and conquer the world and set us all under Islamic law. Well, they think, they really do believe this, that they can accelerate the return of the 12th Imam to earth for the days of judgment, end of times, by creating as much chaos, strife, and warfare in the world as they possibly can. They think that will bring back the Mahdi. Okay, now think of this ideology, 12er Shiite ideology, among a leadership that is driving pell-mell for a deliverable nuclear weapon. That's what we're talking about. No, they cannot be diplomatically convinced out of this. And then the loci of these threats, Afghanistan, certainly. I don't know at the moment, aside from Hezbollah, quite how deeply the current Iranian regime is involved with the Taliban there. I do know that they're at practically daggers drawn at the moment. And here's another good example. Over water from a river that borders Afghanistan and Iran. I mean, they're actually shooting at each other. So again, example, at the local level, they'll tear each other apart. But at the macro level, I don't know how closely Iran is currently involved with the Taliban. I have to say that. But the presence of Iran, its malign presence, malign activities all throughout the Middle East, support for all manner of Islamic terror jihad organizations, from Hamas to PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Hashd-e-Shabi in Iraq, all of them. Plus what we've talked about, their presence throughout the Western Hemisphere and right here in North America. All of that shows that they're very much still intent about confronting us, of course, destroying Israel. It's not just Margbar Amerika, it's Margbar Israel too. And they openly proclaim this at every chance they get to destroy Israel. As well as the United States. So for all of those malign reasons, coupled with the ideology, Iran's current leadership is a very serious threat to international security, American national security interests, with our presence, diplomatic and military, throughout the region of the Middle East. They cannot be dissuaded, and it cannot be left up only to Israel. But what we should be doing, and should have been doing, I think, my opinion, for a long time, is supporting the Iranian people themselves, supporting the Iranian women and girls. Another anniversary coming up, by the way, in September 16, marks the 1-year anniversary of the murder of Mahsa Amini, the Kurdish girl who was hauled out of her family's car in Tehran by the Iranian so-called morality police and bludgeoned to death because her hijab had slipped a little bit and some hair was showing inside of her family car. The 1-year anniversary is coming up. The people of Iran in particular began, led by the women and the girls, still is, but the boys, the men are out there too, with them, led to months of protests and demonstrations, which have not ceased, despite crushing brutality by the regime. But in the lead up now to that September 16 date, once again, the regime is deathly afraid that there will be more demonstrations once again. The girls and the women are not wearing the hijabs. They're taking them off and appearing in public without them. And the regime doesn't know how to handle this. So we should be supporting these people of Iran as they try to fight and stand for their liberty. We've not done that.
So I assume that you are not a fan of the current administration's current plans to allow the Iranians to have access to billions of dollars and
No,
international legitimacy. Okay.
certainly not.
So we've come to
go
the
ahead.
end of our hour, more or less.
Okay.
And first, I want to thank you for a frightening, actually a terrifying presentation on what is out there, what we do know, what we don't know, what our government doesn't seem to care about, and not just this government, but prior governments as well, and what we should be worried about. And it seems to me that that is enormously important for our day-to-day living, but I think also enormously important because we're going to face elections next year, and it may be time to hold leaders accountable, and not just the president of the United States, people in Congress, people in the Senate, people who should know better and who perhaps have not given us their best efforts at securing the American people or our friends and allies. So let me ask you one last question. I try to go out on a positive note. You haven't given us one. Do you have a positive note for us? If you don't, you can say so. But
well, I guess what I would say, the positive note is you, Shoshana, your team there at the JPC, and all the people who are listening and watching this program, and who watch your program every week, actually, because I think that the solution, the answer to all of this, really is more at the local level than it is at the national level, on Capitol Hill, in Congress, although there are actions and people there, good people there, that we need to be supporting. But that really the answer to all of this is awareness, first of all, and then engagement by American citizen patriots like all of you at the local level. And that's where your comment, Shoshana, about the elections coming up is so important.
I'll take that as a positive note, because we can impact the direction of our government and we can impact the direction of our security. Clare Lopez, thank you. This has been enormously enlightening and frightening, but it was a great hour. Thank you very much.
Thank you.